Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Becky Shrimpton, an actor, writer, and podcaster you might know as the producer and host of Hollywood Suite's A Year in Film podcast, which explores a given year in cinema 2 movies at a time. It's a lot of fun. I've done it a couple of times, and I've got another episode coming up later this year where we talk about 2 key films from 1999. Becky's also one of the dozen or so critics and programmers who appear in Hollywood Suite's new documentary series Cinema A to Z, where a given topic is explored through every letter of the alphabet. The first episode, Books, is streaming free right now at hollywoodsuite.ca. I'm in it too. Becky picked The Devil at Your Heels, a 1981 National Film Board documentary by Robert Fortier about the daredevil stuntman Ken Carter and his obsession with jumping a car across the St. Lawrence River from Canada to the US, a distance of more than a mile. The stunt required years of prep, the construction of a massive ramp, the retrofitting of a Lincoln Continental with literal rockets, and, of course, a considerable risk of life and limb. But Ken Carter, as we see, doesn't want to think about that last thing. It's possible that he literally can't. And his state of mind becomes a key element of Fortier's fascinating documentary. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I don't want to say this out loud because I know someone will call me on it, but I'm going to say it out loud anyway. I think I might be one of the foremost Ken Carter experts at this point. I don't know, but I haven't challenged myself, but I think I might be.
There can't be that many left.
There is a website where they are like collecting all of his memorabilia, where they have stuff that I'd never seen before. They of course own pieces of all of the cars, including the car he passed away in. They have been collecting all this stuff.
Pieces of the cars.
Pieces, yeah. They've got, Robert Fortier has a piece of the car too. I interviewed him, and when we were on the Zoom call, he's like, "What do you think this is?" And I was like, "That's a piece of the car." And I had a little panic moment. Yeah, so that was something. But yeah, these guys are collecting media that they're just finding it from all these different sources. And there's one on YouTube where he's getting hypnotized right before the actual St. Lawrence jump to get over his issues so that he can do it, get over his fears, we can do it. And I think it was like the 3rd attempt that didn't go was right when he was being hypnotized. But they've got that on YouTube now, including like all of the ads from the time. And yeah, he's getting hypnotized on live radio. It's nuts.
On radio. Amazing. Yeah. We can get into all of it, and we absolutely will, but we always start the same way. So what made you choose the film you chose? Why The Devil at Your Heels?
Oh, Norm. Now ask someone who loves movies, hey, what movie do you want to pick? Here is the broad expanse of film history. And you're just like, oh my God, there's an existential crisis inside of me. And I knew for me, it needed to be something Canadian because I'm extremely passionate about Canadian film. And I actually went back and forth between this and anything by Sarah Polley because I'm extremely passionate about Sarah Polley films. But when I started talking to my husband about it, I was like, but then this happens and this happens. And he's like, you got the excited face. You got to do Ken Carter. And I was like, we're talking about Devil at Your Heels. That's the one.
Sarah Polley, Ken Carter, they're both famous around the early 80s. There we go.
Exactly. Both of them had fascinating careers that started when they were young and ended up in, places I'm sure they didn't think they were going to end up. And yeah, just weird and exciting and bringing attention to Canada in interesting ways.
And very different ways.
That is correct.
It's funny, actually. Turns out it wasn't Ken Carter. It was Kenny Powers. But I first experienced this story on Faces of Death on a video towards like the 3rd or 4th volume. It showed up. I was working in a jumbo video in 1987, and the tapes came in by mistake. This was back at a time when in Ontario you could not own censored material. You couldn't physically, like David Cronenberg could not have a finished print of The Brood. A complete print of The Brood because of the 45 seconds that the theater's branch cut. So he had to store the masters in, like the negatives and everything were in Quebec somewhere. And if he wanted them in Ontario, he had to make a special request through the governments to get them and cut them and work on them, whatever it was. Or I think maybe it was in the early 80s when they were setting up repertory screenings, he actually had to have them shipped from Quebec, and it was a whole authorization process that it wouldn't even travel into Ontario space on its way to New York or wherever. But Faces of Death was one of the tapes. A bunch of stuff was shipped in. They were sending us VHS tapes for our stock from all around the country, all the other jumbo videos. And so we got this box after box after box. And then gradually it's like, oh, this is the original cut of Reanimator, and this is Day of the Dead. And we shouldn't have these, but I'm goddamn not telling anybody. So we never put them out for rent, but we had them all. And a couple of the Faces of Death tapes came in. And of course, the first thing you put on in the studio, or the first thing you put on in the store, are the Faces of Death movies when everybody's just, it's late at night and we're all just doing inventory. And that was the first time I saw Ken Carter's Rocket Car, because it's included. The Faces of Death tapes were running out of energy. I think they'd run out of death.
They just had to be like, here's a horrible tragedy that nearly killed a man.
Well, yeah, they were like, this is, Faces of Near Missing. But it was like, people don't remember a time when footage was hard to come by.
Yeah.
But, there was no viral anything. This was decades before the internet made it possible to share clips. And so the Faces of Death guys were just running around getting 16 millimeter footage of animal atrocity. They're really horrible, exploitative. I was a dumb kid then to thought these were worth watching. I really just should have been watching Day of the Dead in the uncut version over and over, which I also did. But there is, it's not Ken Carter, it's Kenny Powers, and it's just the clips from, as it turned out, from The Devil at Your Heels, that they had. I don't even know if it was legal or not, that they had just spliced in. It wasn't legal,
no. I talked to Robert Fortier, and he's like, yeah, that was totally usurped. and he has a big issue, too, because for him, Devil at Your Heels is a movie about hope. And it's actually the first 3/4 of the movie you should be focusing on instead of the last little bit, which is what most people focus on.
Of course.
And he won't even, when he's talked to people who have archival footage of his later, the incident that later killed him and whatnot, he's like, do you want to see this? He's like, no, number one, why would I want to watch my friend die? Number two, that's not what, for me, this story is about. It's a story about a man chasing his dream, which, it's very Don Quixote. If you're into that, go for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the last frames of the film are a little super that say Ken Carter is still going to do the jump. And it's sort of nice that it ends there because, that's what would kill him in the end. It was this passion. And I do find the film fascinating in that it is endlessly compassionate to the man in front of the camera who doesn't have a fraction of the self-awareness that the camera has. It's not condescending to him. This isn't a movie that just goes, bless, good for you. Keep on swinging. Way to go, car man. And there are plenty of other movies that do that. Like American Movie or Winnebago Man, where they're actively hoping the guy has an episode in front of the camera. But Fortier really does try, right, to frame him in a compassionate way and not make the movie a freak show. And I did not remember that from the last time I saw it.
Was his buddy, right? They were genuine friends. And actually, he helped him set up his original stunt that it was going to be for he knew he needed one big last stunt that was going to be all anybody talked about. It was going to end Evel Knievel. It was all going to be Ken Carter, right? Uh-huh. And so what he originally pitched to him was, what if you jumped the Houston Astrodome, inside from one side to the other in one of these rocket cars? And he was like, well, that sounds like a great idea. And so he was originally planning that. And then he came up with the idea of the St. Lawrence River. And that was just where did you get that idea from? And of course, he's someone who surrounds himself with yes men, as you see in the movie. Mm-hmm. Everyone is there 100% for his dream. And the one thing I do wish you saw more of was the women in his life and his family talking about it. You never actually get to see his family talking about it. And there's one point in the movie where they are actively discussing his potential death in front of his children. And nobody is fazed by this. It's oh, this happens every day. This is wild to me.
Yeah, just the idea that this is a functioning family unit that has braced itself for him to just not be there for so long that it's become normal, that they've internalized this thing. I couldn't find any material about how the family responded to his death other than just the general sense in the newspaper coverage that, well, that's what he knew he wanted to do. He went the way he wanted to go, stupidly and unnecessarily. And how do you crash so many times and decide to escalate? It's so fascinating. And Fortier's organization, he's going in chronological order through Carter's life, but he is also very clearly, and this is where he broke these bones, and this is where this vertebra was crushed, and here's a car landing upside down, and that probably couldn't have walked away from that, but look at him. It's this guy is, I don't think Ken Carter had a death wish.
No.
But I think there is probably something else that's amiss with a person who does that without a death wish. Like, I genuinely believe Tom Cruise wants this to all be over on some level, and that's why he continues. Like, this is a guy who's been indoctrinated into a cult. Some part of him, I suspect, wants out.
Yeah.
And this is the way he can legitimately do that. And whether he's trying to get out of the cult or whether he's just trying to make it all go away, I do think we're going to, someone else did say it. I wish I'd been the one to come up with it, but it's like Tom Cruise's last film is going to be the first IMAX snuff movie.
Yeah.
Where you watch the thing that happened happen. But Ken Carter genuinely over and over and over blows past the idea of consequence. And I find that absolutely riveting to just watch this guy go, oh, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump this. And he's got this incredible radio announcer voice that he's trained himself into. Like, it is so completely phony, but he lives it 24/7. So it is real. Like, he's a Vonnegut character. You are what you pretend to be.
100%. And the way he talks, like, one of the reasons I love this movie so much is I hear something new every time I watch it. And I've seen it like 40 times. Like, the last time I watched it, he's on the phone discussing his potential to be an astronaut. And you're like, I'm sorry, what? And it happens for like 5 seconds. But he's just making things up as he goes along. But it's so quick you have to catch it. He's like, well, we're going to land exactly approximately at this place. And you're just like, you just double negative yourself. Like, that was nuts. And yeah, all the little things he says. But I think the biggest thing is that he's so proud of how far he's come. And one of the things they show in the documentary is, like, he takes you on a tour of his house where, like, they used to fight to see out the window, which is another fantastic line.
Absolutely horseshit.
Totally, 100%. But, he's there to, like, show you the dream. But you see him kind of go through all of this, and you're like, oh, you wanted to be someone, and you were someone who knew you could be someone. I mean, he just graduated elementary school. He has no junior high or high school education, but he's built this business for himself. Like, he employs many people. He has 2 homes, it appears. I mean, shared pool, but still, that's pretty good. And so you're like, okay, no, you have made something of yourself. And the whole point of this is that he wants to outdo Evel Knievel. And so when Evel Knievel shows up, and which is also another, like, I'm sorry, Evel Knievel shows up moment in this film.
It's wonderful.
He just, it breaks his heart. And you just see him when he's watching him do the Wide World of Sports announcement where he's lounging on the bulldozers as only Evel Knievel can. And he's like, he can't do this. This is suicide. I mean, he's not wrong. This is suicide. He cannot jump a car a mile. But you just see him go, that just fuels him even more of, like, he said, I can't do it. Watch me do it, And I think that's what people dig into when they're proud of him in this film, is that there is that, like, you say, I can't do it, I'm going to do it. It's the Ayn Rand. It's not who's going to let me. It's who's going to stop me. Right.
Yeah. And the sense too, that the simple fact that he is still walking means anything is possible, which, again, that's not how that works, but it is so fascinating to watch someone just refuse to go the extra mile of, oh yeah, no, I should stop while I'm alive. It's no, as long as I'm alive, I'm not going to stop. And his patter becomes, you're right. You're exactly right. He's talking himself into it as he goes every step of the way. But he also truly believes, I think, that the thing he wants to do is achievable. He just hasn't figured out how yet. Yeah. And the problem with that is he keeps trying before it's ready. Like, before you have the answer is not when you strap the explosives on. You wait and you figure it out. I mean, there's that early shot, the first test that they show in the film, which, again, structurally beautifully just done. They kind of constantly dropping in these tests that are not going to work, to just demonstrate that he's working on it. Like, he has a crew and they're trying to fix this thing. And Gordon Pinsent is such a perfect choice of narrator too.
Try.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
It's that relaxed CBC voice. It's not stentorian or authoritative enough. It's just, the crew will not work any further until they are paid $27,000. It's like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's completely reasonable from here.
Did you not find sometimes it gets, like, a little too mean? Like, for example, when they lose all of their safety supplies, and he's talking about who's now left over, and it's like, it's 2 guys and a boat and a rubber boat tow truck, and the kid is getting pretty bored, And then they make the weight comment about the guys are like, then they're having heavy meetings. They show the, like, Jim Deast, and you're like, oh, that's a little too mean, guys. And because it's so dry, it's so perfect. But that's also such an NFB technique that I think at the time people didn't react well to it, and people didn't, but there was like, oh, it's another, National Film Board thing. You're going to throw this thing on, whatever. And this didn't do well. It got like a cult following in Australia, but everyone was like, oh, it's too documentary. And I'm like, have you seen this? There's also the ubiquitousness of stunt people in the 70s, which we don't really have now in that same way.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. He would have just been a hanger-on at the time, right? Or a wannabe, because he didn't achieve the way, say, Evel Knievel did, or I mean, Dar Robinson is the guy who did the CN Tower jump for a movie
twice. He did it twice for a terrible movie. Yeah.
For a movie, well, that's it, right? For a movie that nobody remembers, because it was a Canadian tax shelter picture that really only is remembered because it's the movie Dar Robinson made the jump in, and who remembers that? Yeah. But it is fascinating to watch this entire subculture, which no longer exists, and which, we can get to the Kenny Powers of Eastbound and Down, but it's so clearly like this was Danny McBride's favorite movie as a teenager. There is no question that this is how he discovered it. Although it's also entirely possible that the young Danny McBride found it through Faces of Death, just like I did. But you can see the pageantry and the fervence of the fans. Like, this is a movie that if you see it at the right point in time, it will inspire you or it will break you, and you'll never recover. And Ken Carter wants to be that star. Like, he wants to be the star of that movie. I don't doubt that he looked at this film and thought, yep, that's pretty much me. And it's not like he looks good in it, but you get the portrait of this, like, it's so hard to rationalize it, to bring it into words, but you can watch this and see a man who is dooming himself in every step to this, that this is absolutely going to kill him. Or you can see this guy who's a hero to everyone around him, because there's not a single negative voice in the picture, right? They're all incredibly supportive. The narrator maybe has some qualms.
One or two things to say. And the filmmaker, too, in the moment where he's getting into the speed suit of a man who is like a quarter of his size, and you're watching him struggle into this thing, and you're like, is this necessary? Very funny, but not necessary.
Yeah, that remarkable passive-aggressive Canadian lens.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, buddy, I don't know you want to do that, but we're not going to stop him, because he's doing what he wants to do. And there's this strange integrity to someone who has no, he doesn't have this, he's like an elevator with no safeties on. He's going to go straight to the bottom, and he thinks he's going up. He's not delusional exactly. And it's this amazing psychological text. The more times you watch it, the more it reveals about a guy who, I mean, it's a facile connection now, but in another life, he's a real estate mogul in New York, right? Like, he's the president of the United States in 2016. If you don't believe you can fail, and everyone around you is saying, you'll be fine, I get paid either way, then what happens? And what happens is sometimes you build a rocket car and somebody else almost gets killed in it. And sometimes they make movies about you anyway.
Yeah. Well, I showed this to my mom because at Christmas time I make her sit down and watch something because I'm a terrible daughter. But she cannot handle cringe. Like, cringe is not her thing. And so we make it about a quarter of the way through, and she's like, Becky, I don't know if I can do it. I'm like, you have to trust me. Please continue. So she did, because she's great. And as we're like almost approaching the end, she's like, he doesn't do it, does he? Did he do it? Right? She's like going for her phone to look it up. And I'm like, Mom, just let it happen. Just let it happen. But even she was kind of caught up in the spell, because you're like watching, and things do progress, right? Like, you're watching the ramp get built, and you're like, okay, now they've got these guys from Chicago who are going to build these like perfect jets, and they've done it for thousands of other cars. And but the thing that just keeps breaking that is, number one, everything goes wrong that possibly can go wrong. And number two, he keeps revealing things about himself that you're like, so why are you doing this? Like, when he reveals near the end he can't swim, when he has never been over 90 miles an hour and he has to go over 280 to achieve this jump, and you're just like, what are you doing? Like, it's wild, the delusion, but also there again, it's this weird admirable thing about it where you're just like, you are going for this and it's going to take you down. It's so complicated. It's such a complicated feeling I have about this film, and I think that's why I keep watching it, because he's an enigma. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Everyone loves a dreamer.
Yeah.
I mean, if that was the poster design, I think you could put that out right now. But watching him be unflapped by every single setback, by the people who tell him the physics don't work, by the people who what's the, oh, it's not, again, it's not Ken, it's Kenny who says at one point, you get off you guys want to get off the ramp. You don't want tire tracks on you. It's like, you, that's, I get it. That's bravado. Like he's just peacocking or roostering or whatever you want to call it to get to assert his, how fine he's going to be no matter what happens. But look at this goddamn ramp. It points straight up. You're not going to cross anything.
Yeah.
And then that's like this fundamental flaw that goes all the way back to the first pencil sketch, where clearly Ken did it wrong and no one corrected him because they all assumed, well, he keeps doing this, he must know what he's doing. And like, I think the difference between 1970 whenever and now is that you would have OSHA, like you would have someone come in and shut it down because it's just not safe. But this was a time where, yeah, as you say, stuntman culture was at such a place where all of America would tune in to watch a guy fire a rocket over Snake River Canyon. And only a small percentage of them were hoping he would die. Like people genuinely rooted for these guys. And it's such a strange place to be in now where we're at a David Blaine level of stunt magic 20 years ago where, oh, he's in a glass block for a day or a week or a month and he's just going to sit there. Wow.
Well, I mean, the first indication that this was something special is that Robert Fortier's first short film, so it's kind of considered a trilogy. So the first film is The Mad Canadian, which is like a little 10-minute short for the NFB. And that one is the Halifax jump that the movie here starts with, where he crashes. But he has a bunch of footage from the audience, and he asks people what they're hoping to see. And one guy literally says, well, I think I'm going to see a man break his neck. And you're like, I'm sorry, what? Then why are you here? But there are also people who are like, I want to see something I've never seen before. And even Ken Carter later, when he talks about people going over Niagara Falls in a wheelbarrow, he says, you tune in for the things you don't get to see every day. If somebody dies, I don't think I would want to watch it anymore. And I think that's the other thing that killed, if you will, killed the stuntman, is that it was getting to a point where people were going to start dying, and Wide World of Sports was going to be televising active deaths. And it was like, how far really can you take this? Like Snake River, I think, really was the end of this, right?
Yeah, nobody wants to see the mangled daredevils being dragged to safety. They want to see the astronaut emerging from the capsule. They want to see the triumph.
Well, and even then we don't talk about it. There's a 2018 movie called Stuntman, which was, Dwayne Johnson was the executive producer on it, about it's on Disney Plus, about a guy, a stuntman in Hollywood who's been working forever, Eddie Braun, who did the Snake River Canyon jump. It's about him recreating it, and he did it. He actually took a Calgarian's ashes with him too. Yeah, so it's like, but you haven't heard of it, and you were Mr. Film. So it's interesting that, we just don't talk about this anymore, but he did the Snake Canyon jump.
I wonder if it's an outgrowth of that panic of, what was it when, the reason they didn't let the Human Torch be part of the animated Fantastic Four series was because they were convinced impressionable children would set themselves on fire. That's it. We just don't want emulation. Or maybe there was one story, like an urban legend of the kid that tried to do an Evel Knievel and died. And so we can't do it anymore. But I just assume it's an insurance liability, right? As soon as corporations started buying up all the television networks, they realized we can't show this. You can't put this on television. I mean, now you certainly could. I think, if Netflix or Amazon decided they wanted to do an hour-long special about the most noble deaths imaginable, like stuntmen and gags that didn't work, there's probably, oh God, now I'm thinking about the Rust lawsuits and the footage that people are going to want to see. It is this horrible, morbid fascination. It's the reason we put Faces of Death on a Jumbo Video, because, you're never going to see this anywhere else, and you've never seen it before. But this, and I was struck too that Ken Carter says full on, I don't want to see anybody die. Yeah. When he is literally trying to kill himself on a regular basis for an audience, except that he doesn't ever think it'll happen, right? Like if he had to confront someone else dying, maybe that would ruin it, break the spell for him, and he'd have to stop.
Because I'm getting the impression that his friends, and I don't know this for sure, but at no point does he talk about any of his friends dying doing incidents. People are horribly injured, but no one dies. And I'm wondering if the more often you escape death, the more often you are convinced you're invincible, right? Like it's
certainly possible.
Yeah, I've never died before, and so I did it before. I'll do it again. Also, spinal injury care doesn't appear to exist, because when they're taking Kenny Powers out of the car, and you're
God,
like,
I know,
like it's just shocking. You're like,
don't pick him up by the head.
Yeah. What are you doing? It's nuts. And then you find out he's broken like 7 vertebrae and
Yeah.
his ribs, and he's on the ground and he's like sheet white, and you're like, oh boy. Yeah,
Yeah.
wild.
But there's also something so pure and childlike in the way that he handles it, which is just to say ow a lot.
Yeah.
Like, he's not screaming, he's not crying, he's not doing any of the things you would expect someone that badly injured to do. And I assume he's just in shock, but he has such a naive kind of response to catastrophic injury that you get it, right? Like, he's not performing that for the cameras. That is really what he's feeling. And it's just, that's true. I'd never seen anything like it. And it is sort of fascinating.
Well, when you look at, I mean, even just from a filmmaking point of view, number one, this movie took 5 years to make, which when I asked Robert Fortier about how he kept getting funding for this, he just had to keep convincing the NFB, he's going to jump. This is the year he's going to jump, right? And they were like, yeah, 100%. This is the year he's going to jump. So there was that. But also, you think he's got these cameras exactly the right place, exactly the right time. There was supposed to be a camera in the car with Kenny Powers, but Kenny went too fast, and so they couldn't change the battery. So that camera didn't go. So there was supposed to be something on him, so you would have been able to see what actually happened. But yeah, just the filmmaking of this is incredible to me and monumental, that you can spend this much time with a subject and create this. It's only an hour and a half, like, it's crazy brisk, but the story is so clear and so comprehensive. I mean, it's a feat of editing. It's very impressive.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to tell you about the new Shiny Things newsletter, my weekly dispatch about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming thing. This week, I wrote about Arrow's 4K release of Flatliners, one of the most 90s movies ever made, and how Dan Trachtenberg's Prey does what every good Predator movie ought to do: start from scratch. Subscribe for the price of a latte at shiny-things.ghost.io, or find a link at the Semcast Twitter account. It's me. I'm writing about movies again. Come check it out. Did 48 tell you how long it took to cut? Like, how long he worked in the edit?
I think they went as they went along, which is kind of wild to me. But yeah, it's took a long time.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right. It's incredibly easy to follow, even with the timeline moving back and forth with the cuts to the tests. Because, again, Ken Carter doesn't really change, right? Like, it's easy to tell where he is by location, but and the goatee, I suppose.
Yeah, like the facial hair is really the only indicator you got.
But it's such a strange, he doesn't, the narration does all the work to build tension. You know, money is, there is no more money. He's in a meeting. He's not here. He's in Ottawa in a meeting with the money guys who are done with him. So done, obviously, that they weren't even allowing cameras into the room for the first time. It's like, you don't want to be here for this, which is an incredible missed opportunity, I guess, in terms of what you could have. But I think it would also be the thing that breaks the movie. If you could see him and he wasn't in any way registering what was going on, then it would look like mania.
Yeah.
And if it was, guys, please give me another chance. Here's my, my wedding ring. Here's like, if he starts to hawk things, then it's too desperate. So having us not see him at that point is probably the thing that saved the movie, I think, because, well, that and the fact that Kenny is off stealing his jump and destroying his car, which, again, it's a miracle. Like, it's miraculous and I'm sure too, 48 doesn't have a crew with Ken Carter. He just told them not to come. And
oh no, this story actually gets complicated. So
oh, really? I figured they just picked up the shot after the fact.
No. Here's where it gets weird. So there's obviously, it's controversial on why Kenny did the jump and not Ken. Mm-hmm. So Jonathan Goldstein on his show Heavyweight actually interviewed Kenny Powers' widow, and she said it was she won't say it out loud, but she insinuates that the Montreal mob had something to do with the funding, which construction in Montreal in
what
the
are
70s.
The odds?
Exactly. And that Kenny had a lot of gambling debts, and that they were pretty sure Ken had lost his nerve and he wasn't going to do it. So they distracted Ken, and they, and then they had Kenny do it, which is one of the reasons why Kenny wants to do it as fast as he can, because he has to do it, right? So that's kind of option one, and that's what Kenny's widow says. What's weird about that is that Kenny Powers had an autographed 8x10 of Ken Carter held in a beautifully made leather folder with him every day until the day he died, which is like, Okay. And they were best friends again afterwards. So one of the other theories is that Kenny did the jump because Ken had lost his nerve and he did it for love. And he was like, okay, well, someone has to do this jump. I'm just going to take one for the team. And so Ken pretended to be distracted and he's pretending to be mad. And that's what that is. Now, Robert Fortier says both of that is bull.
Okay.
What he says is that the jump was done because of the Hollywood film crew. The Hollywood film crew had a deadline that they had to like film for Japanese TV or something, and someone had to do the jump, and they were pretty sure Ken wasn't going to do it. So they're the ones that called the investors and said, you need to have a meeting with Ken. And they set up a bunch of stuff with him about, we're going to get you in Japan. You're going to tour Europe. So they were distracting him with that when they sent Kenny off. And so they actually contacted Robert Fortier because they had 2 cameras and he had 8. And they were like, we need you to come get B-roll for us. And he was like, no, he's my buddy. I'm not doing this. What are you guys doing? And they were like, well, it's happening with or without you. So get down here. We're doing it. And he didn't have enough time to get to Ken first and say, this is happening. It was basically get the shots of this happening or go and inform your best buddy that his jump is being stolen. And so he ran and got the footage of it. But that's also why you're seeing it happen as fast as it can, because they're on that deadline and it's got to go. So that's what he says happened.
My God, all of those explanations are equally plausible.
I know.
That's how wild the story gets by the end of it. Any of those things or all of those things could be true.
And he's just so surrounded by all these hucksters and yes men and people who clearly cannot do the job, even though they're very confident they can do the job. And you don't know what's true. You don't, because everyone's so confident in this movie until they leave and go back to Chicago because the engine exploded for the 6th time, like. Yeah,
that should have been, the clue that this wasn't going to work. Just there's that moment where the first on the day, like the first abort, when it's like, there's something wrong. I'm like, they're terrified. They're not like, this isn't a fun thing to do anymore. Everybody has lost whatever illusions they had about adventure or childish expectations of success and heroism. Like, nobody's getting fortune and glory out of this. They're going to die, or at the very best, get very badly hurt. And so, if Ken is there, maybe they eat him. Like, maybe they turn on him with the irrepressible enthusiasm that is no longer functional. I just can't get past the perfection of the structure, right? Like, there's everything is accounted for, even if there are 3 different explanations for why something is happening on the day. We see everything we need to see, and that's kind of incredible.
It's remarkable. So if you do want to see more, now I do have to be very clear that this has the footage of the jump in which he dies. So if you don't want to do this, if you don't want to see it, you know it's coming, so you can jump over it. But Chex in Peterborough, CHEX, actually did a tribute to him in 2013 called Ken Carter, Stuntman to the End. It's about 25 minutes. Graham Hart hosts it. And it talks about the aftermath of this, of him working back up to doing the jump again. And then, of course, he passes away really horribly. But what's interesting about it is that in the run-up to it, he does another jump, which is over a replica of Caesar's Palace's fountain filled with reptiles, including a single alligator and a couple of snakes. And I'm just like, I love this. It's magnificent. But so that is available on YouTube. But as I said, that does have the footage of him dying in it. So if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But you can jump over it. I jumped over it. Literally, you can kind of see it, right? So there's an afterword.
Oh man, how long have you been part of this fandom? When did you first discover the movie? I don't totally remember, but what I think is I lived on Commercial Drive with 2 stand-up comedians. One of them actually Mark Little, who is of some note now, with an incontinent corgi. And at 3:00 in the morning, when we were all drunk and or high and or various states of whatever, because that's what you do on Commercial Drive when you're in your 20s, and we would just put in like weird movies we would find at this amazing video store around the corner. And I'm pretty sure this was part of that collection, that we all watched it and were like, holy shit, what is this? And that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of other NFB shows where I was like, what is this? So like High Grass Circus, if you haven't seen this, it's about a traveling circus through like Saskatchewan, and like somewhere in Saskatchewan there is a hippo buried by the side of the road, just so you know. But I was not aware of this.
Now people like are leaving in the middle of the night to like just scamper away from this circus, and like it's just the life of these traveling carnival people. Fascinating, totally worth your time. There's The Defender, which another like doofus with a dream, as I call the movie, about someone from Winnipeg. He's still doing it, like amazing. He is determined to bring back the bomber plane building to Canada. Like that's what he wants to do, is he wants to build jet planes. So it's him trying to reconstruct these planes when that's not something he can do. But the movie opens with him having built a swimming pool in the middle of his living room because he and his kids got hot one day. And that's the kind of guy you're dealing with. I mean, it's amazing. It's wonderful. Very, very similar to this documentary. So if you're a fan of that, and I mean, of course, like Project Grizzly is another one that ended horribly, tragically, and very sad. But like another portrait of this incredible human being, this inventor, and watching him get beaten up by bikers outside a club in this armor. You're just like, what am I watching? The Ewok traps, like.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing that did occur to me watching this, is like, this guy is Troy Hurtubise.
Yes.
Taking the log to the chest in his armor to prove that he can take a log to the chest. Yes, you're proving you can take a log to the chest. At no point is a bear going to throw one at you.
Exactly.
It's the hyper focus on the ridiculous part, the thing that isn't going to be a factor. Like, yes, you have created a jet fuel that burns faster than most jet fuels. Is that going to help?
Exactly. What does that do? Yeah, it's wonderful. And I think that's what I love. I think I love the enthusiasm. I'm an enthusiastic person, as you can hear. And I think I appreciate seeing that in other people. But I think I also really like asking the question, why? That's what's so interesting to me. If you pointed them, there's a line I love in this that I use all the time, is it cannot be steered. It can only be aimed like a missile. And I think that's the perfect example of what Ken Carter is as well, but also of these people. Like if you aimed them in that enthusiasm in the right direction with the right skills, what could they actually accomplish?
I still don't know.
Exactly. Why?
This is something that I want to get the director's name right. Yes. Sorry. This is what John Bolton, I think, was getting at when he made Aim for the Roses, which I know you've seen. That was just a delight when I stumbled onto it in a big pile of hot dog screeners back in 2016. I didn't know the album existed. I knew Ken Carter's story, but I didn't realize someone had made a concept album about it.
Entirely for bass, which is wonderful. Yeah.
And it's as ludicrous a challenge to set for oneself, right? In a way, but it actually works. And you have completed art. Like you have finished the thing. He did the jump in his own way. And the film is so charmingly straight-faced about what it's doing, and the person they got to play Carter and lip sync the dialogue or the lyrics, I suppose, from Mark Haney's album, is just on point. Like he is exactly the same level of ridiculous that the real Ken Carter is, with the same complete lack of self-awareness. The actor must know. Right? Like that's what I was thinking watching Aim for the Roses. Like this guy knows it looks ridiculous, but that's part of the bit. And then you watch the real Ken Carter. It's like, no, he had no idea. He really didn't know.
No, and you see that translated. We talked earlier about Kenny Power. And of course, this is another point of contention where like 100% Danny McBride saw Kenny Power. At some point, he saw this movie or he saw him in one of his other stunts or something. That is something he will not respond to for obvious reasons. His widow actually did inquire about that, and she actually watches it with her son on a regular basis, that show, because it reminds her so much of her husband who's now gone. But yeah, there's been no acknowledgement whatsoever that Kenny Powers is Kenny Powers. So
yeah, life rights. You can't do that.
Exactly. So that's a whole point of contention. But that's another thing of like you're seeing, and it's such a rare trait, I think, in an actor to be able to play that straight and not have that sense of ridiculousness and that wink to the audience, right?
Yeah, it's a gift. The other thing I will say about Ken Carter is he never winked. Like he committed to the bit from the beginning to the end, and to the point where I don't know that we ever see the real Ken Carter.
So you are seeing the real Ken Carter. I asked Robert Fortier about this because I said, was there ever a moment he was ever vulnerable or like any self-doubt? He said, nope, what you see is what you get. He was on 24/7. And this is interesting to me because there's an Alice Cooper quote that I absolutely love, which is there's Alice Cooper who bites the heads off of snakes and there's Alice Cooper who does his laundry. And that church and state didn't really happen here. However, he's still able to manage his business. Like he still thinks of himself as Kenneth Gordon Polachek and Ken Carter, and he still runs his business and he still does the booking for himself. But he really has created two personas that are just entirely bravado.
Yeah. He projects. It's not even. Is it bravado or he's projecting competence, right?
Yes.
Not confidence, but
competence. Yes,
and
good call.
has none.
Yeah,
but. If you say it long enough, you will be it, right? Like you fake it till you make it, or until you die in a horrible disaster of your own engineering. It's not funny. It's so tragic, but it is like the meme, like, oh, if it wasn't the completely foreseeable consequences of my own actions. He is on this trajectory. He is the missile he's aiming. He just doesn't understand it.
For me, I love, as I mentioned earlier, I watch a ton of movies like you do, Norm, and you kind of become numb to them at a certain point, unless there's something really special happening that grabs you by the emotions. And this movie makes me run through so many emotions. Like you're laughing and then you're shocked and then you're just horrified and you're back down to laughing. Like and of course he ends with this line of like, I'm going to teach the children like the Eagles do. And you're like, I'm sorry, what?
I think he meant Crosby, Stills and Nash.
I think
he's thinking of Teach Your Children Well from the song.
Yeah.
But in that moment, like I once saw a briefing from someone who confidently told me to my face that he was very, very proud to have secured the rights to the People's Choice winner for TIFF in 2010, Rabbit Hole. And it wasn't Rabbit Hole. It was The King's Speech. But he bought Rabbit Hole. And so that was the People's Choice winner. I'm not even sure it was a runner-up, but he was just like to my face and was like, it was The King's Speech. It's like, no, Rabbit Hole. And just blew past me. And that man was, I'm pretty sure, a sociopath. I don't think Ken Carter is, but I don't think Ken Carter has time to be corrected. Like he is knitting his fabric together as he goes. And if he's thinking about the Eagles, they're the ones who sang the song.
That's right. I mean, he's just, if you pardon the pun, he is the most driven human being I think I've seen. It's
to a point, yes.
Totally. But the thing is, it's also about someone who, yeah, you're right. The competence, because he is competent to a point. He would not have had the career he had. People knew who he was. People would come out to see him. But he just bit off more than he could chew. Right. And that was the knowing your limit sort of thing, which I think is the lesson of that movie is, yeah. I mean, you can't, at the end of the day, it can't be done. Like the person who holds the world record right now is from 2011 and he only jumped, I think, like 388 as opposed to the 4,500 that he actually would have needed to have done. You know, it's just wild.
No, it's, I think it's the kind of thing we should tell Elon Musk about because it'll keep him busy for a while. It'll just be distracting for him and he'll get so wrapped up that he'll forget to tweet.
He's going to go into rocket cars. Don't tell the man who manufactures cars that he can't do it.
My thanks to Becky Shrimpton, who you can hear on every episode of Hollywood Suites A Year in Film podcast and see, along with yours truly, on the channel's new documentary series, Cinema A to Z. The first episode is streaming free at hollywoodsuite.ca/cinema-a-to-z. Thanks also to Angie Power. She knows what she did. You can find Becky on Twitter at Leshrimpton, Leshrimpton, and you can find The Devil at Your Heels on DVD from the National Film Board, or streaming free online at both nfb.ca and the NFB's YouTube channel. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 46 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll like it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you enjoyed it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can. I'll see you next time.